Hello, this is Ken Barron, here again with the National Association of Black and White Men Together. We'd appreciate it if you'd subscribe to us. If you want to get in touch with us, you can do so on this platform, Facebook Live, and we're on YouTube and other platforms. Thank you for listening. So, let's get into this and see what our today's agenda is. It's on acting white, and let's start. So what is acting white? Well, it's something to do with black kids and achievement. And you've probably heard that too many black students don't do well in school because they think being smart means, quote, acting white. It's a popular thing to say, but it's a very creative interpretation of inadequate research and anecdotal evidence. And at worst, it's a messy attempt to transform the near universal stigma attached to adolescence nerdiness, I'll explain that, into an indictment of black culture, which often ignores the systemic inequalities that contribute to the country's racial achievement gap. Now, here at the NABWMT, we emphasize the relationships between various groups in the country and the world. And we focus on racism and homophobia. And this is one thing that touches our young black and white and Latino, just people at the margins, especially this achievement gap. The acting white theory is an idea that African American kids underachieve academically because they and their peers associate being smart with acting white, and because they're afraid that they'll be shunned. This was born in the 1980s, and John Ogbu, an anthropological professor at UC Berkeley, introduced it in a study of one Washington, D.C. high school. And there he found and dubbed an oppositional culture in which he said students saw academic achievement as, quote, white. The acting white theory has since become a go-to explanation for the achievement gap between African American students and their white peers, and repeated as if it's a fact of life. Well, here at the NA, we don't believe in fact of lives, we believe in facts backed up by research. Authors such as Ron Christie in Acting White quote the curious history of the racial slur, and Stuart Buck in, quote, Acting White, the iconic and ironic legacy of degradation. They have written entire books about this using personal observations, anecdotes, and theories. Even President Barack Obama said in 2004, when he was running for U.S. Senate, quote, children can't achieve unless we raise their expectations and turn off the television sets and eradicate the slander that says a black youth with a book is acting white. Then, Obama noted in 2014 remarks, which were related to the My Brother's Keeper program, that it was, quote, sometimes overstated, but he still offered the theory in the form of a personal observation, saying that in his experience, there's an element of truth to it where, okay, if boys are reading too much, then, well, why aren't you doing that? Or, why aren't you speaking so popular? It's no surprise that acting white narrative resonates with a lot of people. After all, it echoes legitimate frustrations with a society that too often presents a narrow, stereotypical image of what it's meant to be black. It validates the experience of African American adults who remember being treated like they were different, or being smart, but not popular in school. And for those who are sincerely interested in improving educational equality, it promises a quick fix. So the saying goes, quote, if they would just stop thinking about being smart and acting white, they could achieve anything. The acting white theory also validates a particular social conservative worldview by placing the blame for disparate academic outcomes squarely on the backward ideas of black children and black cultural pathology. Instead, it should look harder to tackle factors like socioeconomic inequality, implicit racial bias on the part of teachers, segregated and under-resourced schools, and the school discipline disparities that create what's been called the school to prison pipeline. The acting white research is weak. The acting white theory is difficult to access through research, said Ivory Toddleson, a Howard University professor, senior research analysis for the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, and deputy director of the White House Initiative on HBCUs, and he wrote this in The Root in 2013. He then went on to say, quote, many scholars who claim to find evidence of this theory loosely interpret their data and exploit the expert gap to sell their findings. Despite abundant personal anecdotes by African Americans who say they were good students in school and were accused of acting white, there's no research that explicitly supports a relationship between race beliefs and acting white, social stigma, and academic outcomes. Even those who claim to have found evidence of the theory, Tollefson explained, fail to connect the dots between what students deem white and the effect of this belief on academic achievement. Quote, observing and or recording African American students labeling a high-achieving African American student as acting white does not warrant a characterization of African American academic underperformance as a response to the fear of acting white, he said. Interestingly, studies suggest that highest achieving black students are more popular than the lowest achieving ones. A prime example of a shaky study on this topic, according to Toddleson, was Roland Fryer's 2006 research paper, quote, Acting White, the Social Price Paid by the Best and the Brightest Minority Students. It was published by the magazine Education Next. The Harvard economist purports to affirm Ogbu's foundation findings by using AdHealth data to demonstrate that the highest achieving black students in the schools he studied have few friends. Quote, my analysis confirms that acting white is a vexing reality within a subset of American schools. But the numbers don't actually add up to support the acting white theory. Tollefson said, to start, the most popular black students in the study were the ones with 3.5 GPAs. Students with 4.0 GPAs had about as many friends as those with 3.0 GPAs. The least popular students, why, those with less than 2.5 GPA. It seemed that the social price policy paid by the lowest achieving black students were actually far greater than the price in popularity paid by the highest academic achievers. Fryer himself said there was, quote, no evidence of a trade-off between popularity and achievement for black students at private schools, poking another hole in the theory. Plus, Tollefson pointed out, even if the results are shown that the highest achieving students at all schools had fewest friends, that would have been indicating a connection between grades and popularity, but wouldn't have supported the core of the acting white theory itself. He explained, methodologically, the study has to make the ostensible leap that the number of friends a black student has is a direct measure and a consequence of acting white. That's probably line 2011, Smith College, Tina Wildhagen in the Journal of Negro Education, hate that word, but anyway, that's the official word, tested the entire causal process by the acting white theory using the educational longitude study, a big study, over the years in 2002 and found, quote, the results lend no support to the process predicted by the acting white hypotheses for African American students. Research suggests that black students have more positive attitudes about education than white students. There is an established phenomenon called the attitude achievement paradox, which refers to the way positive attitudes about school can fail to translate successful academic outcomes amongst black students. Originated by Rosalind Mickelson in 1990, it's been the subject of extensive sociological research. A lot of these findings fly in the face of the idea that black students think academic achievement is white or negative, or that it is something they must actively shun for acceptance and popularity. While Tolson analyzed raw data from a 2005 CBS News article, or monthly I should say, it's a poll of 1,000 high school students who were asked their opinions on being smart and other smart students. You saw this reflected again. Students were asked about grades, about what was normal in the school, and the responses of the black males and black females were analyzed, but black males were the most likely to consider such students cool. Students also asked the question in general, if you really did well in school, is that something you would be proud of and tell all your friends about, or something you would be embarrassed about and keep it to yourself? 89% of all students said they will be proud to tell all. Black females were top among this group, with 95% saying they'd be proud. Meanwhile, white males at 17% were the most likely to say they would be embarrassed or keep it to themselves, or report that they did not know how they would handle the news that they were doing well academically. The point is, all racial groups have nerds, and Freier's research found that the highest achieving black kids were the least popular, but this likely had much less to do with the beliefs about acting white and more to do with the fact that the very smartest kids of any race tend to suffer social stigma. Typically, high-achieving students, regardless of race, are to some degree stigmatized as nerds or geeks. School structures, rather than culture, may explain this, while stigma becomes racialized, producing a burden of acting white for black adolescents, and when it becomes class-based, producing a burden of acting high and mighty for low-income whites. Why it matters is that we get this right. The acting white theory is tempting to believe because it does contain pieces of truth, don't get me wrong. Yes, there is a racial academic achievement gap. Yes, there are plenty of African American adults eager to tell stories about how they were shunned because they dared to be different. And yes, some super high-ranking black kids, like kids of all races, suffer social stigma. These individual facts are each painful, and they each resonate with people in a way that makes it easier to blur what's missing from the acting white equation. An actual causal relationship between acting white, social stigma, and lower academic outcomes. There just isn't one in the research done so far. Stories about the sources of educational inequality can shape public attitudes and public policy. These stories will continue to distract from the real problems: poverty, segregation, discipline disparities, teacher biases, and other structural factors. Unfortunately, none of these issues seem to be easy to fix, and you can't fix them by simply changing the belief of black students. Well, here at the NABWNT, and as a member of that organization and as a former educator, it's refreshing to see that we're still looking at factors that go into public beliefs on black and white attitudes in society, since our organization has been doing that for the past 40 years. The source of this work was mostly the Vox Online, and there's some New York Times articles on this. We thank you so much for listening and hope to listen soon.